Good evening. I'm Mark Ellis, Director of Public Affairs, and this is another in a series of Kenyon Unique Lectures. This is the brainchild of Matt Winkler, and his idea is to preserve the lectures of some of our finest faculty members. And tonight we have Howard Sachs, who's going to discuss food for thought. Howard is a visionary in Knox County. He is the one who created or contributed to the farmers market and who has contributed to tremendous Kenyon outreach in this community. So I'd like to welcome Howard Sachs, Professor of Sociology and founder of the Rural Life Center. Howard.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to all of you for coming out on what is an uncommonly chilly spring evening. You're very brave. Tonight I want to raise three questions for us to consider. Where does our food come from? Why does that matter? And what are the implications of those questions for a liberal arts education at Kenyon College? Where does our food come from? If you ask that question of most people, they'll give you a curious stare, and then they'll say, from the supermarket. And that's not entirely bad, because it means that for most people, the sources of their food are unproblematic. Now, let's not forget that there are 16 million children who go to bed every night in food-insecure households, and that there are food deserts in many urban centers where it's impossible for people to get easy access to supermarkets or grocery stores. But for most of us, food is abundant, it's affordable, and it's safe. When you go to the supermarket, you don't worry whether or not there will be food on the shelves. Americans on average spend less than 10% of their household income on food. That's cheap. And most of us, when we get that food and bring it home, we aren't particularly worried whether or not it's going to make us sick. So that's all well and good. But recently, people have begun to ask questions about the sources of their food. For some of us, the question is a matter of taste. We're tired of eating eggs that have about as much flavor as the styrofoam containers that they come in. For others, the issue is health, childhood obesity, adolescent eating disorders, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and a host of other maladies that are associated with the food that we eat. For others, the question is food safety. Just this week, Blue Bonnet Creamery recalled 8 million gallons of ice cream because 3 people died eating it in Kansas because it was laced with listeria. And just today, Jenny's Ice Cream in Columbus had to do the exact same thing. Ice cream, right? Now, all these issues, taste, health, safety, are legitimate reasons to ask where our food comes from and why it matters. Because these issues affect each and every one of us every day as individuals. But the sources of our food also have a significant impact on the agricultural communities that produce that food, communities like Knox County, Ohio. Knox County is a community that's rich in rural character. What do we mean by that? Well, rural character has something to do with the landscape. You go outside and things are green, open space, fields and pastures punctuated by the unique constellation of buildings that constitute a family farm. When I go outside, step on the porch and look out over my farm, all I hear are the sounds of nature. Lately, coyotes, which is not so great. And when I go out at night and look at the sky, all I see are the heavens above, the stars and the moon. That's rural character. Rural character also involves a distinctive economy. What's the tallest building in Mount Vernon? Is it the county building? Is it City Hall? Is it the courthouse? Or is it the grain silos at the farm co-op, where farmers bring their commodities every fall to be shipped off to market? Rural character means an economy definitively shaped by agriculture. It's also a matter of social relations. In an agricultural community, relationships are intimate, they're personal. The relationships in the family overlap with those at school and in church and at the Grange Hall and in voluntary organizations like 4-H. Here you see a 4-H project at the county fair. A young woman with her poultry project being judged as part of the fair activities. There are over 1,200 young people participating in 4-H this year who will bring projects to the county fair. Social relationships in rural communities are oftentimes multi-generational. And rural character also means a distinctive culture. In some respects, that's expressive culture, like Wayne King and the Hoedowners playing at a barn dance last fall in Mount Vernon. But it's also distinctive cultural values: hard work, independence, neighborliness. Now, all these dimensions of rural character, the landscape, the economy, society, the culture, all have their roots in a particular kind of agriculture: family farming. Family farming, as the name suggests, is run by a family, often multiple generations working together on the farm. Family farms tend to be small. In Knox County, the average farm is about 200 acres. They're diverse. You'll have a few cattle for meat and dairy, some hogs for meat, some chickens for eggs, a big garden for canning and freezing to put up food for the winter. And the food that's produced is consumed by the family itself or for a local and regional market. That's the way farming has been or was in Knox County until about World War II. After the war, things changed because of 4 agricultural revolutions. The first one was mechanical. Tractors and combines replaced horses and threshers. Old-timers will tell you it used to be that everybody knew the inside of every farmer's kitchen, because in the fall, at harvest time, all the farmers in the area would gather together to help harvest, and at the noon hour, they'd all go to the farmer's kitchen for a big dinner. That has changed. Today, 2 people can run that equipment and harvest 50 acres of corn in an afternoon. The second revolution was chemical. Herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers to increase yield and profitability. This is a picture I took a couple of weeks ago at the Farmers Co-op in the warehouse, where you see containers of Roundup herbicide ready for this spring. The third revolution was biological. Genetically modified seeds, genetically modified animals that were resistant to disease and provided increased yield. So now you go to expert seed consultants to tell you what the latest variety is that you can plant in your field. And the most recent revolution is digital. Here you see a sign by a field for Ag Infotech. Now a farmer will have a GIS unit in the cab of his tractor where he can track square foot by square foot how much fertilizer or herbicide or pesticide he has to put in his field. By the way, I like taking pictures of signs, as you'll see. In a rural community like this, it's the way the community talks to you. You can pay attention, you find out what's going on in the community in signs like this. Now, these revolutions transformed agriculture. First, agriculture got much more expensive. It went from low input farming to high input farming because those seeds and chemicals and fertilizers and equipment cost a lot of money. Not long ago, my neighbor, Paul Smith, had his combine in a field. He was harvesting corn last fall. The field was kind of muddy, so when he brought his combine out onto our rural road, had lots of, mud on the wheels. Just so happens that a fella comes right down the road right behind him, and he hits the hard pavement and all that mud starts flying off the wheels and onto this fellow's car. This guy was hopping mad. So Paul goes down about a half a mile and turns into his lane to go up to his barn. The fella follows him right up the lane. Jumps out of his car, starts yelling and screaming, "Look what you did to my car. I'll have you know this is a Mercedes-Benz. Cost $75,000. Paul just looked at him and he said, "Well, this combine costs $200,000, so get your piece of crap off my farm." Farming gets expensive. To justify those expenses, the farm has to get bigger. It makes no sense to have a $200,000 combine if you're only raising 30 acres of corn. So you get bigger and bigger farms. And they stop doing diversified production. They go to monoculture, one crop, cattle, or whatever, for a global market. Now, what does this do to family farming? Well, if you have to borrow $200,000 or $250,000 every spring for the petroleum products and the herbicide and the pesticides and the seed and everything else, if your corn or your cattle don't work out that year, or when you take it to market the commodity prices are low, you lose your shirt. And if it happens twice in a row, you lose your farm. And so agriculture increasingly shifts from family farmers to agribusiness, to corporations that can afford to take those chances because they're vertically integrated and control all the costs, and they're horizontally integrated. So if Tyson's has to take a bath on poultry one spring because the prices are down, their Nike stock is doing just fine. So what are the implications of that? Well, that's one implication. There's a sign I don't like to see. Farms get sold off. And young farmers can't even afford to get into it. I was talking to the manager of the farm co-op the other day when I was taking that Roundup picture, and we tried to estimate how much it would cost for a young person to get into farming. And I said, $500,000 easy. He said, no, that's not enough anymore. To get some used equipment and access to a little bit of land and some animals, livestock, or whatever, probably closer to $750,000. What 20 or 25-year-old has that kind of scratch? The average age of farmers in Knox County is 59 years old. Who's going to produce our food in 10 years? But it's not just the farms that lose out. It's the businesses that support farming. Those small family-operated businesses like this one in Fredericktown that provides hardware and farm supplies. What does this mean for rural character? In 1994, I initiated a project with my students. We called it the Family Farm Project. And we were interested in all the ways that family farming affected community life. And we did field work, we did interviews, we hung out with farmers, we went to the farmers co-op, we did historical research to try and understand this. On the left is Courtney Coughlin, a student at Kenyon College, interviewing Mark Bennett, who was then an agricultural extension agent. We were trying to find out about farm implements at a farm implement dealership. And we took our research and turned it into a series of public projects. The first year we did a radio series that was broadcast not only across Knox County but nationally. And I want to play you a little bit of Courtney's program. She was following one family, the Norris family. 3 siblings, John Norris, who was farming full-time, Tim Norris, who went into farming but had to get out of it for financial reasons and was then working at the Farmers Exchange, now the Farmers Co-op, and Pam Norris, their sister, who left Knox County to get a higher education and go into teaching. And listen to what Courtney found out. We're going to pick up the program. She's in the Farmers Exchange talking to a co-worker of Tim Norris.
Tim also introduced me to Wes Hines, who works at the feed mill. We discussed the way farming has changed in Knox County.
The day of the family farm's going. I hate to say that, but it is. They're either great big farms or they're small part-time farmers. The day of a man taking 200 acres, 30, 40 milk cows and something, that guy's going. It's all the big farms now or the little guy that works in town. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it's going to get even worse.
So how does that affect your business?
Well, it's more competitive than ever. We have to, like I say, we have to go out farther. We got to be better at it. That's for sure. You know, I mean, when we do find a guy, we got to be able to provide the goods and service when he needs them. That is the biggest, probably, a lot of times.
Although Tim no longer farms, he still feels a great connection to the land and feels proud to be involved in agriculture.
I think the farmer is a true and the first environmentalist, and like the Grange organizations, they always stressed how the farmer was a steward to the land, and I think they need to realize that a farmer's land is his living, and that they're not going to do something to destroy that.
Tim and John's sister, Pam Owen, moved away from the farm to attend college, but returned to Knox County with her own family to be closer to home.
Well, I can't think of my life without thinking of the farm, because the farm and my life are the same. Mm-hmm. So I would have to be second guessing. So it's an integral part, and they're woven together.
I understand. That makes sense.
You know, but if the weaving of my life did not include the farm, then I don't know. Would it feel the same or not? And I feel like the farm is almost a person. It's very personified for me. When I would come home on college breaks, when I would bring the children home for a visit to their grandparents, when I drove onto the property, it felt like we were exchanging hugs, like we were embracing the farm. People have told me that that's not real weird, although I think it feels a little weird. So I don't know where that comes from, and I would be really interested to find out if other people feel that way. And if they do, tell me, and if they don't let me know.
For Rural Delivery, I'm Courtney Coughlin.
Where does our food come from, and why does it matter? About this time, another force came into Knox County that affected agriculture: urban sprawl. Columbus was moving this way, and farmland was being replaced by developments like this one on 229 between Gambier and Mount Vernon. We saw it happening in Delaware County, where the farmland got gobbled up pretty quickly. I'm sure many of you have driven through New Albany. I see nods of agreement. That used to be a farm community. Now it's multi-million-dollar estates. I think my wife Judy nailed it when she said, "So much fence, so little livestock." In Knox County, the rallying cry became not another Delaware County. And to its credit, Knox County didn't take this challenge lying down. It began a public conversation stimulated in part by the Family Farm Project. We asked ourselves, what is it that we like about our community and want to preserve, and how can we shape the forces of change to be positive rather than negative? Conversations around the supper table and after church were augmented by focus groups and surveys, and out of that came a long-range plan, Focus 2100. And that plan said that the primary goal of the long-range plan was to preserve rural character. And because of the work of the Family Farm Project, it noted that one of the primary ways to do that was to protect small-scale family farming. So how do you do that? Well, there are a lot of strategies that have been employed. The first is protective zoning. All but 2 of the townships in Knox County have zoning commissions. And the purpose of the zoning commission is to create rules and regulations about land use. Land will be zoned for agricultural use or residential use or for industrial use or for business use. So protective zoning tries to designate as much land as possible only for agriculture. Now, about this time, I was asked to become a member of my township zoning commission, and I eventually became chair of my zoning commission. If you want to immediately become unpopular with every one of your neighbors, become chair of your township zoning commission. And even though we were trying to protect farmland, which people were generally in favor of, they were highly resistant to what we were doing. And interestingly, much of the resistance came from the farmers themselves. And here's the reason why. Let's say the agricultural use value of your land is $2,000 an acre. We're going to do a little math here. And a developer from Columbus comes up and says, I'm going to give you $10,000 an acre. And the average farm in Knox County is about 200 acres. 200 acres, $10,000 an acre, $2 million. And if you're 59 or 62, and your kids have decided there are easier ways to make a living than farming, and you're land rich and money poor, and you don't have an IRA or a big fat account in a bank for retirement, what are you going to say to that developer? You're probably going to say, Ma, I think it's time to move into town. So the farmer comes up to me and says, Howard, let me get this straight. If we pass this new zoning, I can't sell to that developer. But my neighbor, a half a mile down the road, who happens to be in the next township where they don't have that zoning, he can sell. Is that fair? It's a reasonable question. So it's not surprising that you began to see this sign around rural Knox County. Because if there's one thing that rural residents don't like, it's assaults on their private property rights. That's part of that cultural value of independence that is part of rural character. Well, the second strategy is to buy the development rights. We'll get a nonprofit organization like the Philander Chase Corporation or the Owl Creek Conservancy. And they come up to that farmer and say, the difference between the agricultural use value and the development value is $8,000, 10 minus 2. You with me? We'll give you the $8,000 up front. You keep your farm. You can farm it. You can pass it on to your children. You can sell it to somebody else as a farm, but it has to remain a farm. We hold the development rights in perpetuity. Well, that sounds pretty good. The farmer gets the money, keeps the farm, farmland is preserved. It's a beautiful world. Only one problem. $8,000 times 200 acres the cost to preserve that farm is $1.6 million. And there are 1,200 farms in Knox County. You do the math. And if there's one thing that rural Knox Countyans hate more than assaults on their private property rights, it's new taxes. The Rural Life Center suggested a third approach. From our work with the Family Farm Project, we knew that farmers wanted to farm. You go to their homes and you interview them, as our students did, and they'll go on for an hour about how hard farming it is, how you can't make a decent living, how dangerous it is, how hard it is to go do an off-farm job all day and then come back and work half the night. And so our students ask the obvious question, why do you do it? And they all say the same thing. It's in my blood. I can't imagine doing anything else. Working outside with nature, giving life, growing things, working with my family, being my own boss, those are the positive values of farming. And their children want to farm too. Many of them go down to Ohio State University and become big animal vets or learn high-tech applications to farming so they can come back and be close to agriculture even if they can't buy a farm. The problem is they can't make a living wage. And that's a big problem, because if we preserve farmland but don't enable farmers to make a living wage, all you're going to preserve is a bunch of empty fields and pastures. So we suggested the following. What if we develop an alternative market for local food products? What if we develop a sustainable local food system that puts more dollars directly into the hands of the farmers? When you go to the supermarket, on average, the farmer gets, across all products, the farmer gets about 11 cents of your food dollar. The rest goes to advertisers, distributors, marketing executives, so on and so forth. So if we could put more of that dollar into the hands of the farmer, dollars that would recycle up to 7 times, according to sociological research in the community, before it leaves the community, and put tasty, healthy food in local consumers' houses, that's a win-win-win situation. It's good for the farmer, it's good for the economy, it's good for the consumer. We called that initiative Food for Thought. One of the first things we did was an economic impact study. We collaborated with Ohio State University. What would it mean if everybody in Knox County spent 10% of their food dollars locally? We thought, that's reasonable. It means if you go grocery shopping and you're going to buy $60 worth of food for the week, you spend $6 on local products. You buy some eggs or some beef or some cheese, whatever. What would it mean to Knox County? It would mean $13 million annually in increased retail sales. It would mean $4 million additional annual employee earnings, $344,000 annually in additional local taxes, and 243 jobs. That's significant in a small community like Knox County. If an outside business came here and said they wanted to locate in Knox County and they'd provide $13 million annually in sales and $344,000 in additional local taxes, we'd be jumping all over it. And it's already here. All we have to do is connect the dots. So how do you connect the dots? It involves 3 things. Build supply, get farmers who are willing to produce products for local consumption. Build demand, raise local consciousness about where our food comes from and why it matters. And build the infrastructure to connect farm to table. What we wanted to do, in effect, was rebuild the local food system on 21st century terrain. go back to the future. Okay? So where do we start? Well, the first thing we did, we produced this Homegrown, local food sources in Knox County, listed about 50 or 60 local farmers and what they produced and where they were and how to get in touch with them. There are about 12,000 of these floating around in Knox County, and that got people thinking about the sources of their food. And we realized that people might drive home from work, and if there was somebody selling eggs on the way, they'd stop and buy local eggs, but they probably wouldn't drive 20 miles across the county to get maple syrup. So then we had another idea. What if we bring all the farmers together and put them in one place, and then everybody could come and buy the local food at once? Yes, we invented the farmers market. Now, today in most cities, you can't walk down the street without tripping over a farmer's market. But in 2000, when we started it, it was a very novel idea. And we decided to put the farmer's market in Public Square in downtown Mount Vernon to try and entice people to come back to the historic downtown, which had always been the commercial center. The first time we did it, 9 farmers showed up. We didn't know if anybody would come. In 20 minutes, everything they brought was sold. We knew we were on to something. Today we have 40 or 50 farmers. People come every Saturday. I send my students out to do field observation. And you know what they see? People come and spend on average 20 minutes buying stuff. But they stay on average for 3/4 of an hour. What are they doing? They're socializing with their neighbors. They're having that easy, informal conversation that is such an important part of rural character. So this has an economic dimension, but also an important social dimension. Well, individual consumers buy a lot of food for their families, but institutions buy more. Kenyon College produces 2,500 meals a day. And so the next step was to see if we could start buying locally in institutions, like Kenyon's Dining Hall. It's a lot harder to do this than it is to put together a farmer's market. Let me give you one small example just to suggest the complexities. Let's say you're the chef, and tomorrow you're going to make chili, and you need 40 bushels of tomatoes. Well, you can just swivel around in your chair and type in Cisco or some other national distributor and scroll down and type in tomatoes. Boom. 30 seconds. The billing's taken care of automatically. Tomorrow at precisely the hour you need it, 40 bushels in a semi back up to Pierce Hall's loading dock. What if you want to buy them locally? Well, you can't go to 20 different farmers and try and do it. Now you can go to the Owl Creek Produce Auction, which was created as part of Food for Thought, where Amish farmers bring their produce for sale. But you have to drive across the county to get there, and then you have to wait for the tomatoes to come up, and you have to hope they're the variety you need for chili, and you don't know what the price is going to be, and you have to pay in cash and do the paperwork later, and then you have to load the tomatoes into your own truck and take them back and unload them on the loading dock. Multiply that by 100 items a day, and you get some idea of how hard it is for a place like Kenyon College to source locally. Very long story short, today Kenyon purchases 42% of its food locally. No one in America can touch us. Yes, we use a concentric circle model. We buy whatever we can within about 20 miles of the flagpole because we want to support family farming. That's why we're doing this in part. Those things you can't get within the county, we go out to 50 miles, which is sort of the surrounding counties. So if there's no poultry processing facility in Knox County, you got to go up to Holmes County. Okay? And then what we can't get there, we get within 100 miles, sort of Ohio proud.
Howard, if you don't mind my asking, what are the cost implications of that?
There's a much better expert in the audience than me, but I'll wing it. It's not as significant as you think. I mean, the assumption is it's going to cost more. And some things do cost more. Meat costs more because you're getting much higher grade meat. And it's processed in such a way as to give you higher quality. But you can compensate for those things that cost more by saving money elsewhere. There's nothing cheaper than blueberries in Knox County in July. It's a lot cheaper to buy those blueberries, buy the ones that can't be sold retail, flash freeze them, and then use them in February for muffins and pancakes. A lot cheaper than buying boxed frozen stuff. So overall, it doesn't cost all that much more if you do a careful job of it. And John Marsh here is the person who does that careful job. So it's affordable. So these are just some of the things that we have done in order to build a local food system. And it keeps going. We now have a local food store in Mount Vernon. The restoration of the Woodward Opera House is going to include in the basement a commercial kitchen so that farmers can create value-added products to make more money. The work that we have done has become a model not just for Ohio, but for the nation. But what does this all have to do with liberal education at Kenyon College? We're not an ag school. Well, let me suggest, first of all, that in some ways I think Kenyon College and liberal education are better suited to addressing the problems of agriculture in rural communities than the ag schools are. The ag schools, when trying to deal with the problems of farmers, either provide a new biotechnical solution to increase productivity or a new economic model to enhance short-term profit. But the work that we've done through the Rural Life Center takes a more holistic approach consistent with the liberal arts. We have come to understand that you can't have sustainable agriculture unless you have sustainable agricultural communities. It's a matter of society and culture, not just economics and technology. What we're trying to do is put the culture back in agriculture. And our students have been at the forefront of this at every moment. And in the process, they've not only enhanced the community through their engagement, but they've also had rather remarkable opportunities to do creative, scholarly, and creative work. And let me show you just a few examples of that. See that Kenyon t-shirt on the right? That's Becca Katzman. We've done a lot of summer internships. We were getting so many requests from around the country trying to figure out how we did that local food thing that we do in the dining hall that we decided we need to document it fully. So Becca and another student spent the entire summer exploring our farm-to-college system. They went out and interviewed Amish farmers. They went to kill floors and processing plants. They ran the numbers in AVI to see how the economics of it worked and wrote a 55-page paper and an executive summary that you can see on the Rural Life Center website to document that. Here you see Becca along with some people from AVI and the 2011 Knox County Junior Fair Queen with the champion of the pen of 3 lambs. The goal of the pen of 3 is to raise 3 lambs that are as alike in character and size as you can. And this was the grand champion. And every year at the auction of 4-H projects, AVI goes and buys some of the champion animals. And that's good for the students, good for the 4-Hers, it's good for AVI, and it's good for Kenyon College. Liesl Schmidt spent an entire summer with some money in her pocket, a roadmap of Knox County, and a survey instrument. And every time she saw a sign like this, she drove down the lane and interviewed the people. What do you sell? How much of it do you sell? How much do you make for it? Who are your customers? she documented this aspect of a local food system, and the data she acquired became part of that economic impact study. Here you see on the left Casey Griffin, another Kenyon student who worked with retired executive chef Paul Higgins on the right. And they worked to try and ensure that local foods got into the hands of the neediest members of our community. Because a local food system has got to feed everybody, not just the upper middle class. And they would go to the food bank and find out what fresh food was coming in the next day, and they would put together menus and show up and give presentations on what you could cook with that food. Here you see Casey in Public Square in Mount Vernon. In the middle is Mayor Richard Mavis, where she put together a big celebration for kids to educate children about where their food comes from and why it matters. A lot of what we did with students took place in classes. In my rural life course, we did a major project called Where Does Your Food Come From?, which traced food from farm to table. The outcome of that was a 21-panel exhibit. Here you see the debut of the exhibit. Some school kids came up to Kenyon to see the exhibit. That exhibit has now traveled throughout central Ohio and is on permanent exhibit at Malabar Farms State Park, part of the Ohio State Park system. Marcelle Hackbart, in her art class, decided to work with the theme food and culture. Students created art projects and debuted them in a public exhibit at the Buckeye Candy Building, now owned by Kenyon College. 2 years ago, we did a week-long conference that attracted people from all over the state and the Midwest called Rural by Design, all kinds of activities. Belinda Craig Cahata, a professor of dance, worked with her class to develop an original dance piece that explored the relationship to a historic barn. Think of it as a 21st century barn dance. The Mount Vernon News recorded it and put it up on their website, and here's about a minute of that. Food for Thought became part of the curriculum here. We had a special academic initiative with some 20 courses across the curriculum dealing with food, farming, and community life. Faculty got involved through a variety of summer faculty seminars on local community life. Here you see a number of faculty out on Fox Hollow Farm in Fredericktown. What's interesting about this is that left to right you have an anthropologist, a religious studies professor, a sociologist, and a biologist all across the curriculum, watching how you deal with a bummer lamb. For those of you who don't know, a bummer lamb is a lamb that for whatever reason refuses to nurse from its mother, and it has to be bottle fed. That's the origin of the term bummer. And if you've ever had such a lamb, it is indeed a bummer. Students got their hands dirty too. Here you see a group of students from the student organization PEAS, People Endorsing Agrarian Sustainability. They worked to build a garden at Wigan Street School and then worked with the students and the teachers to build growing things into the elementary school curriculum. We created a cooperative program with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association, OFA, the State Organic Farm Association. Students took 3 courses associated with Food for Thought, and then they worked all summer on a paid internship at a sustainable farm. and they got a certificate in ecological agriculture from OFA. This program's still going on after 15 years. And this is Chrissie Layman. Chrissie Layman is a Kenyon alum. She graduated with highest honors with a synoptic major in rural studies, went on to Ohio State University to do graduate work, but then she decided she wanted to return home to take up farming. And she has created a very innovative, forward-looking, small-scale farm. It's called the Farm on Kenyon Road, out Route 308. She's on the cover of the current edition of Ohio Magazine, which is the magazine of the Ohio Farm Bureau. This is very interesting because the Ohio Farm Bureau, those are the progressive farmers, the ones that adopted the new technology and high input farming. But now they're putting her on their cover. The kinds of things we've been doing with Food for Thought are starting to work their way into mainstream agriculture. Now, the point of Food for Thought is ultimately not to create farmers, although you would be amazed at how many Kenyon graduates have gone into agriculture. I think there's a value in this that's much greater. The political philosopher Eric Zensei wrote an essay not long ago called The Rootless Professors. And he notes that at places like Kenyon College, most faculty come from somewhere else. And at Kenyon, the same is true of our students. We have very few Chrissie Laymans, right? Very few students born and raised in Knox County. And Zensei suggests the significance that this has for education. And I quote, "Unrooted teachers and students tend to mistake disconnected from locale for educated. They tend to think of education as little more than an organized assault on the parochial point of view, the view of the rooted I. Education can be that. Education certainly ought to broaden one's horizons. But it can and ought to do more. And however we define that more, one thing seems clear. Because professors and students tend to be rootless, they are systematically ignorant of a key aspect of an integrated life, a life that is, after all, a primary goal of a good liberal arts education. They are woefully ignorant of the value of connectedness to place. We live in an increasingly mobile world, socially, geographically. Our world is increasingly virtual, and it has become more and more difficult for us to gain a connection to place, something that's fundamental to living a good life. Connectedness to place is a skill we have to learn, like critical thinking and writing well. And as such, it's essential to liberal education. So I want to close with a comment by one of our students, Courtney Coughlin, who you met through her radio program. At the end of the Family Farm Project, I sat down with the students and I interviewed them. And I said, what did you get out of this experience in Knox County? And here's what Courtney said. Some people were asking me, you might not ever live in a rural area again after you leave Kenyon. What good does it do you to understand this community? What good does it do you to know anything about farming? You're not going to be a farmer. And my response was that no matter where I am, whether I'm in a big city or in another country, the idea that I can reach out into a wider community beyond my own sphere is very important. The way that has enriched my Kenyon experience can also enrich my life. And that's food for thought. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we want to take questions? Somebody who's running this thing, tell me. Couple of minutes. I know it's been a long day for many of you. Please.
Howard, one of the things you didn't talk about in terms of engaging other parts of the liberal arts community is the economics department. Is that something that have you ever thought about, are there ways to take what you have done here and to try to infuse it into the market-based economy to affect change at a more granular and broader level?
Absolutely, and I think that's important, and I certainly think the economics faculty here, given that they're liberally educated, would certainly be a prime candidate to help us do that. At the same time, we have no illusions that small-scale farming can feed an exponentially growing population in the planet. Our goal here is not to replace larger scale farming with small scale family farming, but to make it an important part of a diverse agricultural picture. And I think that's certainly going to take some new economic modeling to see how that would work. And I think we've already begun to see some of the impact of this at Kenyon and in Knox County and elsewhere in the country. Our Ohio cover is one qualitative indication of that. But you see it too in national food distributors like Cisco, which have now adopted a new model that is more local, regionally focused. So instead of simply shipping things 3,000 miles, they're trying to feed their institutional buyers from a more regional locale. So I think this is starting to make economic sense even for the big guys. But there's a lot more work that has to be done to make it happen.
Howard, to build on the point on economics, there seems to be a lot of hidden costs in the current system. Whether it's monoculture means we're more exposed to blight, there's food security issues that flow from that. If you look at the concept of the production economics of today, the scale economies depend upon cheap oil for transport and cheap natural gas to make nitrogen-based fertilizers. Then you got all the environmental impacts. How do you see us being able to bring these issues into the public policy sphere to influence it?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And in economist terms, and boy am I on shaky ground here, you have to decide what's essential to your formula and what's an externality. And a lot of things that you mentioned are currently externalities in the models. Not to mention things like the psychological well-being of the farmer, for whom family farming is part of their blood and their livelihood and their sense of family. How do you build, what's the value of that in a model that's talking about how you want to do agricultural policy at the federal level and whether you want your subsidy dollars to go to large-scale petroleum-based agribusiness, or whether you want to put some more of that money into supporting small-scale family farming or organics and the like. I think we've got to take a much broader view of what the costs and benefits are. And I think a liberal arts approach, which is more holistic in its thinking, is more likely to generate that kind of thinking than the traditional ag school economics, which are much more narrowly focused on short-term profit. One or two more.
Do you feel like you've been able to affect the decision process that is staying in farming for some of the local farmers, either anecdotally or through a greater analysis of who owns them and who's making decisions to stay?
More qualitatively and anecdotally than systematically, although I think we've been doing this long enough that it would be useful to collect that systematic data. That we have heard back from a number of farmers, local processors, and the like, who have said, if it wasn't for Kenyon buying local, we'd be out of business. So there are clearly parts of the farm infrastructure here that have only survived and continued because of that. And you begin to see the Chrissie Laymans who have decided to come back to farming and are trying to do it a different way. And you see more and more of those kinds of agricultural systems, operations showing up locally. And then, not simply here, but elsewhere, we see what our graduates are doing, some of whom are in the room tonight, who have gone off and done all sorts of interesting agricultural related projects, whether it's community gardening, urban gardening, working in educational centers. So that has a ripple effect. It begins to change the way we look at agriculture generally, and that feeds back to the kind of farming that's done. So I think we can definitely say we've had an impact.
Howard, considering our nation is increasingly urban, and this model obviously has great relevance here in Knox County, but how do we go the next step for all the Americans that are living in the cities? How do we deal with that issue?
Well, the first point to be made is quite straightforward. We all eat. And so what goes on in our rural communities has a profound effect on all of us, whether we're directly associated with it or not. I'll give you a more substantive example of an answer. Not the current governor, but the previous governor of Ohio, Governor Strickland, had a very interesting observation. He said Ohio is the most urban state in the Union. It's got more metropolitan areas: Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo, Mansfield, Dayton, Cleveland, and the like. More cities than any other state in the Union, all surrounded by high-quality farmland producing a wide diversity of products. And so he asked, for reasons of consumer health and the economy, why don't we connect up those abundant rural areas and have them produce food for the cities? And he created an executive advisory council to do it. I was fortunate enough to be on that, and we tried to figure out ways to connect that system, to bring that food directly into the city. I think that's the sort of thing that we can do to start to raise consciousness and have an impact even on urban residents. And in some ways, you already see it. Farmers markets are, a perfect example of that, whether they're the ephemeral kind that just show up on Saturday, or things like the Cleveland market or the North Market in Columbus. I think things are beginning to change there as well.
This kind of feeds into it a little bit. I've been involved in the groups that got to where you could use your food stamps or SNAP benefits or WIC benefits for farmers markets. And I remember when we were first trying to do that, people were like, are you crazy? I mean, using your SNAP benefits for the farmers market? And that was just a common thing even for seniors. And so I was wondering, a lot of what you're talking about is really dependent upon laws and policies. And you mentioned the governor and what he said, but what has been the involvement with your program with politicians, which I think is really important, especially considering the significance of the farm bill.
Yeah. That specific initiative to have food stamps and other benefits for low-income people be available at farmers markets and like is precisely one of the things that came out of that governor's advisory council. We made that happen, and the Mount Vernon Farmers Market now takes that. Organizations like OFA have done a lot. They do a lot of political lobbying and the like. We've had the director of the Department of Agriculture at Ohio here to speak. The Rural Life Center gets less involved in that kind of statewide politics. We're more focused on the immediate community. But you're right, it's really critical. And there are all kinds of impediments, particularly for low-income people, to using local food. Some of them are a matter of policy, but some of them are a matter of resources. We can work to get local foods into the hands of low-income folks, but if they don't have a refrigerator or a working stove, there's not much they can do with it. So this is a very challenging initiative. But I think it's one that for us as individuals, for ourselves as a society, and certainly for rural communities like Knox County, are absolutely indispensable. One more question.
Just a comment real quick. I didn't save an email. I just didn't mean to get back to you, Howard.
Okay. Well, people actually talk face to face now.
I worked with Howard on a project years ago called "Where's Our Food Come From?" obviously, and it had a profound effect. And since then, I became a member of the board of directors for the Mount Vernon Salvation Army. This year, instead of spending money in the food bank, we're buying CSA to get fresh produce to at-risk youth, 40 to 45 kids every day, and then Thursday night at the Hot Meals program. So we're doing that. That has had an impact on that one.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, and also one of the initiatives to be enhanced by Food for Thought was the Community Garden Program, which also provides food for hot meals and the like. Lots of students have worked as interns on that. So it's a multi-headed operation, but it's good to hear that organizations throughout the community are beginning to take up the challenge. Thank you all very much for coming.